So let's check in on the drug war. This is from the Daily Beast. The Mexican drug war is now well over a decade old. After more than 10 years and billions of US dollars spent, the conflict continues to spread throughout the country. The Mexican drug war is now well over a decade old. It began in December of 2006. All right, let me pause there. My understanding was that it actually started all the way back under Richard Nixon. So I don't know why they're saying December of 2006. Maybe they're talking about a newer phase of it, an even more militant phase of it. That's possible. Let's continue. When then President Felipe Calderón sent some 6,500 soldiers into the western state of Michoacán, I fucked that up, I'm sure, to quell cartel violence. After more than 10 years and billions of US dollars spent, the conflict continues to spread throughout the country. Authorities estimate some 200,000 people have been killed so far. 200,000, wow. With another 30,000 missing, and it's getting worse. From 2016 to 2017, the number of drug war deaths jumped by almost 30%. So far, 2018 is on pace to eclipse that grim tally. In September, a burial pit was discovered in Veracruz containing the remains of 168 people. Sadly, that's no longer uncommon. Another recently uncovered mass grave held 250 bodies. Resort towns once thought to be immune to the violence, like Cancun and Los Cabos, are now cartel battlegrounds. A generation ago, Acapulco was Mexico's answer to Las Vegas. Today, Acapulco is one of the deadliest cities in the hemisphere and a magnet for child prostitution. Even Mexico City, long considered a safe zone, is no longer exempt. Firefights in the heart of the city of Hope are increasingly common. Just weeks ago, hitmen disguised as mariachi musicians shot up a popular tourist district, killing 6 and wounding 9 more. So why is it so hard to win the drug war? Critics point to a failure of both strategy and tactics on the part of U.S. and Mexican authorities. The prevailing approach thus far has been the so-called kingpin strategy, which targets the cartel's top commanders. But the demand for narcotics in the U.S. is so high, the trade's so lucrative, that there are always other would-be kingpins waiting in the wings. Notorious drug lord Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is now imprisoned, and his once dominant Sinaloa syndicate has balkanized into warring factions. But powerful upstarts like the Jalisco New Generation Cartel have already arisen to take Chapo's place on top. And new groups like the CJNG tend to be more brutal than their predecessors, precisely because they must outcompete so many new rivals and splinter groups. Tactically, the Mexican armed forces are engaged in a stalemate with what experts now call a criminal insurgency. There are no great battles to win, no objectives to take, and the enemy can blend seamlessly into the general population. So troops and federales often just roam aimlessly around the countryside, making little contact with their foes unless they happen to get ambushed. Another pivotal factor is rampant poverty and corruption. The lack of education and economic opportunities for much of Mexico's population guarantees an endless supply of sicarios, hitmen, who prefer a short life of glorious criminality to slow starvation and hardship. Dirty cops are such a problem that entire precincts have been disarmed by the military for being in league with organized crime. And what of Michoacán, where it all began? Both it and neighboring Guerrero State are still among the most dangerous regions in the country, labeled off-limits by the U.S. State Department. They are at risk of becoming failed states, places where the government no longer owns a monopoly on power despite or because of a decade of conflict in these territories, all of which prompts a question. If nothing changes and the failed and worsening drug war rages on, what will Mexico look like another 10 years from now? That is a fascinating article. Now, there are aspects that they didn't touch on, though, which I think are important to bring up. So I'm going to bring them up now. We covered a story on this show probably a year or two ago about how, maybe it was 3 years ago, actually, come to think of it, about how there had actually been a decrease in drug war-related violence. Now, why was that happening? It was right at the time where legalization happened in some states in the U.S. So when you have states selling legal marijuana, what it does is it hurts the black market, because you just took a market out of the black market, and now, it's where everybody can see it. And why would you go and buy drugs from some creepy dude on the corner in a back alley when you could go to a legal business that is playing elevator music and has all these different choices and has, people who are functioning members of society that aren't criminals? So it was as a direct result of legalization in some states, you had a decrease in sales in the black market and a decrease in criminality. You had fewer crimes happen because there was a lot of the trade was taken off of the black market. So what happened that led to the increase now in drug war violence? Well, they kind of explained it in this article. It's the U.S. strategy and the strategy of the Mexican authorities that led to the increase. So we got El Chapo since then, and he was the number one drug kingpin. Well, when you got rid of El Chapo, so this is the kingpin strategy. If you cut off the head, then the rest of the body dies. That's the philosophy. But that turns out that doesn't happen, because you cut off the head of the cartel, and then like they explained, there's always other people waiting to be the next kingpin. And so you had fractions break off from El Chapo's cartel, and then you had fighting in the streets among the people who wanted to become the next big kingpin. So that led to an increase in violence. So you got rid of the kingpin, and then it got worse because now there was more violence to try to determine who the next kingpin would be. And now you had the cartels become like mega cartels. So it's fucking fascinating. If you think about it, if your goal was really law and order and peace, so not having, people die in the street all the time, it would have been better to not take out El Chapo, believe it or not, and to not just legalize in certain states in the U.S., but that leads to the next point, which is legalize at a federal level. Because, so obviously your decapitation strategy, your take out the kingpin strategy, that's objectively not working because the violence is getting worse. But stop doing that, but don't just stop doing that. If you actually were to legalize at a federal level in the U.S., then you're absolutely obliterating the black market for drugs. Because you don't need a black market anymore, because now you have the regular market. And then if you were to legalize at a federal level in the U.S., you could also have a lot more production being done in the U.S. Now they have to hide and do it with sketchy practices that might not be the safest practices in order to be in that business. So the same thing happened with prohibition of alcohol. When you had it illegal, it was made in bathtubs, and they would cut the product with questionable chemicals, and then some people would die from a bad batch of alcohol. I mean, you still have people who die from alcohol, whether it's from cirrhosis or whether it's from, alcohol poisoning. But people died from a bad batch of alcohol. It doesn't happen anymore because we have regulations and because it's legal. So if you were to legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana, you wouldn't have the questionable practices in terms of production. You could set up a flourishing marketplace, flourishing businesses in the U.S., and you could have regulation of it to make sure everything's safe and on the up and up. And you can stop the production line from fucking brutal mega cartels who are involved in murder and all-out war. So that's the answer, but unfortunately, we're going further and further in the wrong direction, because what happens is it's a snowball effect in the wrong direction, because when they see more violence, they think, okay, we got to crack down even more militarily. But then that leads to even more violence. So the answer is not the decapitation strategy, the knock out the kingpin strategy. It's proven that that doesn't work. The strategy is what worked for a brief time before they took out El Chapo, which is start legalizing in the States, keep legalizing in the States, and then eventually those markets will dissolve, because we know we have the evidence of it. They're not going to, why would you get involved in a black market drug trade when it's not lucrative anymore, because nobody's coming to you, because there's legal markets in the States and people already have their supply lines set up and they don't need to buy from you, especially since there's a decent chance that your cartel is murderous scumbags. So we know what the answer is, but we keep going in the wrong direction. And I mean, these numbers are crazy. Remember, I told you it started with Nixon, the drug war. There's been over $1 trillion spent on the drug war overall. And then they said 200,000 people have been killed so far in the drug war. 200,000 people. That's what? More than 4 times the number of U.S. soldiers that died in Vietnam? I mean, 200,000 people. That's perhaps equal to the number of civilians that died in Iraq. The minimum number is 200,000. There are estimates that go over 1 million, but that's the minimum number, 200,000. 200,000 people have died in the drug war. So the drug war, people have to realize this, is an actual hot war. It's destroying the Mexican economy. It has destroyed the Mexican economy. In some places, they say it's kind of a failed state. So you cannot fix it without getting to the root cause of the problem, which is the black market. So the way you fix that is to legalize, tax, and regulate in the U.S. And then in Mexico, they'll move to other industries, and there will be a giant decrease in violence and deaths, and everybody would be better off. We know what the answer is, but we're not doing it, and it's maddening.